Now, I won't say that any of these that I'm going to describe was made with religion in mind. It's been made because we're a secular state. It's been made with all of us in mind. If you fall in on account of your religious belief or practice, the law will not say that because it is you and you were praying, you are allowed to disturb your neighbor. If you look through our constitution, the freedom of religion is upheld several times. I don't need to go through it. But there are also clear limitations that they will not allow you, even on a religious platform, to propagate a theory or principle against the statehood of Ghana. And so you cannot mount your platform every time and deprecate the Republic of Ghana. It's a useless state. We all should, I don't know what else to say. But the Constitution says you can't do that. And Parliament can actually pass law to restrain you. It is not targeted at a pastor. But if a pastor decides that his propaganda, his message is to deprecate the state of Ghana, the Constitution will stop you because it is a secular state. Now, so I could bore you with all the constitutional provisions, but there you see, you have the right to religion, but subject to the provisions of the Constitution, Article 26, 35, that the state itself will promote the integration of the people and no prejudice on grounds of religion, creed, or other beliefs. So your religious right is protected, but in the same way, there are restrictions, and that is where I want to deal with it in the next couple of minutes.
Okay.
One, a pastor or priest is not a public officer. But if that person is performing functions in respect of issues like notification of marriage, solemnization of marriage, that person, that minister of religion, becomes a public officer.
Okay.
So when you go into the mosque and the marriage is being conducted, for the purposes of that marriage, the minister of religion, the person who stands in as the minister of religion or ecclesiastical officer, is a public officer. Now, if that person is a public officer, then there are certain protections. One, assault of a public officer. So while the man is conducting the wedding, you go in there and obstruct the wedding, or to molest him, resist him, use threatening, abusive, or insulting language while he's conducting the wedding. It is not just normal assault. It is assault of a public officer. It is as if you did that to a policeman. Because once they are performing those rights, we give them the status of a public officer. Two, so if you fabricate evidence with intention to mislead a public officer, that in going to the priest, you forge your divorce papers. It's fabricating evidence with intent to mislead a public officer. You go to jail. Corruption of a public officer. What has become topical recently? Deceit of public officer. And let me explain this.
Right.
The lady was sentenced to 2 jail terms. One was Section 208, publishing false news.
That's right.
One was deceiving a public officer, because the minute she appeared before the police and made the kidnapping allegation, it was deceit of public officer. So while she was jailed for 2 years for the false news, she was jailed for 6 years for deceiving the public officer.
Which is a minimum for deceiving.
Yes, which is a minimum for deceiving. So if you are going to see a pastor for the purposes of marriage, and you go and sit before him and lie, you could go to jail for 6 years. Because whilst the pastor is performing that function, the pastor is a public officer. And in no other function.
So the pastor has become the property of the state.
Absolutely, because the pastor has decided to exercise those powers in performing certain rights. The pastor has become a public officer. Outside that, he's not. And of course, accepting or giving a bribe to influence a public officer. But there are also certain offenses that can be committed only by public officers. For example, falsifying books. So if the pastor sits down and for the purposes of a marriage, falsifies a marriage certificate, offense, because for that purposes he's a public officer. Or falsely pretending to be a public officer, corruption, willful oppression, which is the abuse or causing injury or the public, extortion, issuing false certificates, destruction of official documents. All of those are offenses that a pastor may commit simply because the pastor is a public officer. So the pastor has certain protections if he's working as a public officer.
What official document will a pastor be destroying to get him into trouble?
Similar to marriage certificate. The man comes and says, Charlie, yesterday the marriage, I don't like it again. Let's burn the certificate. And the pastor, let's shred it. You're in trouble.
Okay.
The death certificate. If they come to you and help, let's destroy the death certificate so we can claim some insurance. The pastor is in trouble as a public officer. So you see that the law is not going after pastors.
So will the pastor get the same protections that a public officer gets?
If the pastor is working in the capacities that I mentioned, the capacities of the notification of an intended marriage, publication of the banns, solemnization of marriage, in respect of making or keeping a register or certificate of marriage, birth, baptism, death, or burial. Marriage, birth, baptism, death, or burial.
And almost a similar thing applies in Islamic marriages.
Absolutely, the same thing. To the extent that the minister of religion, so maybe it's better we use the term minister of religion, or ecclesiastical officer of any denomination, is performing any of these functions, that person is a public officer. And all the public officer related offenses apply to that person as though the person was a public officer.
Okay.